most known for being the frontman for the heavy metal colossus Iron Maiden. In this video, I will only be covering the solo career of Bruce Dickinson, which spanned 6 albums in a little over a decade. Feeling boxed in whilst in Maiden, Bruce Dickinson would leave in 1993, beginning a solo career that allowed him to expand out musically and add a new dynamic to his voice. And he would put out some underrated classics in their own right, but his first album ain't one of them.
We went into a studio last summer and we just wanted to do a rock and roll album. Something that was a little bit different to all like the glam stuff and all the makeup and all the pan stick and all that kind of stuff that's going on these days everywhere. The Maiden thing I've always regarded as being, I don't know, really like a very directional sort of entity. I mean, it's the sort of band Maiden where it takes on its own meaning. It's got its own style, its own direction. And when you're in Iron Maiden, that's it. You just we go for it, you know. But the solo thing, it's more, I guess, mainstream sort of hard rock. I mean, Maiden are the sort of band that's going to leave you bleeding in the gutter, especially with our new album, which is finished, by the way, and we will be out to see you on a tour later on this year. My album, I suppose it's a bit more mainstream, a bit more hummable, a bit more catchy, and I make no apologies for that. I think it's great.
Dickinson was still an Iron Maiden when he put out Tattooed Millionaire, and it shows, considering the similarities of the songs on here with what he was writing in Iron Maiden at the time, and the fact he had future Maiden bandmate Yannick Gers on guitar. Tattooed Millionaire is just Iron Maiden light and feels like it should come with a side of seltzer water. This album sucks 5 different shades of ass, a dull ball fest that will have you grasping for the newest Maiden album. The only song on here that's kind of decent is Son of a Gun.
Ride on, you son of a gun! Ride on, right into the setting sun! Ride on, you son of a gun! Yeah! Ride on, you son of a gun! Ride on, right into the setting sun! Ride on, you son of a gun!
But as a whole, Tattooed Millionaire seems kind of spontaneous. And I guess the premise of this album is that Bruce Dickinson was asked to write a song for the Nightmare on Elm Street movie and proceeded to write a whole ass album. But as I said before, Tattooed Millionaire is a clown show. But what do you expect with songs like Dive, Dive, Dive and Zulu Lulu? Fuck this tripe.
What I was trying to put in this record was a whole bunch of influences that you wouldn't normally get in hard rock music. So
Right.
we had a bunch of, you know, Latino, Mexican-American rock musicians. And we stole a bunch of Tamla Motown riffs and put them in as the bass rhythm tracks, whacked in a load of African and Latin percussion, mixed all that in so you couldn't hear it, but it made your butt jiggle.
So
And
these
then-
kind of things that you wanted to do before with Maiden, but couldn't really do it?
Well, it's all kinds of things that you find out that you can do. Like there's a couple of tracks where there's a bit of rapping involved. There's a couple of tracks
Who does?
where
Do you do the rapping?
Yeah.
Or?
You know, and stuff like that. It's like, wow, you can do that. There's a couple of things. There's a couple of real heavy reggae things on there, you know. And the thing is that the whole thing is meshed together by this raging slabs of guitar. This is some of the heaviest music I've ever made in my
Really?
life. You know, and at the same time, some of the coolest and some of the weirdest. You know, you won't hear another record like this year.
Alright, now we're talking. Bars to Picasso is Bruce Dickinson's first solo album upon leaving Iron Maiden, and it is worlds apart from anything he had done before. For Bars to Picasso, he joined up with members of a band called Tribe of Gypsies, which were a Latin hard rock band out of LA, and among them was guitarist Roy Z, who's not only a great guitar player, but a great producer as well. Just check out his work with Rob Halford. Roy Z brings a whole Latin touch to the album, along with a versatile playing style that gels with Bruce's more raspy vocals. So, it's not bone-crushingly heavy, but personally I love this album. There's a perfect mix of metal, hard rock, and Latin fusion, and each track is different, going from dark and grimy to heavy and bluesy. You have tracks like the opener, Cyclops, which is about the age of easy access and the fact that everyone's life is tracked in the one eye of the camera. Songs like Gods of War and 1,000 Points of Light, which was a phrase taken from Daddy Bush's program of the same name, both of which are somewhat critiques of the United States' incurring interventionist policies. And then you get to the two songs at the end, Sacred Cowboys and the captivating ballad, Tears of the Dragon. Some of the songs too are kind of comical, like Laughing in the Hiding Bush, which was supposed to be the original name for the album, and Shoot All the Clowns. If there's one song that can be knocked off, it has to be Fire, which is the most insipid and repetitive track on Bars to Picasso. It's easy to compare Bars to Picasso with what else was going on in the mid-90s, but I think that does this album a disservice, because between Bruce and Roy Z, they were able to create something totally different rather than follow a specific trend. And that's what epitomizes Bruce Dickinson's sophomore effort. In the years following the release of Bars to Picasso, Bruce Dickinson would form a new band with a touring band for that album. This band was supposed to be a separate project altogether called Skunkworks, which was sort of Bruce's attempt at grunge and alternative. But by the time their album was about to be rolled out, the record company demanded the album be under Bruce Dickinson's name, feeling that Skunkworks didn't have the same buying power. And Skunkworks became the name of the album. The grunge factor on Skunkworks is undeniable, and the album was produced by Jack Endino, who was most known for working with grunge bands. But when listening to Skunkworks, it's clear that it should have been released under a different name. I know Bruce Dickinson was trying to do something different, but to any metal fan, this is the most off-putting album of his career. Well, To Picasso succeeded in having a different sound and atmosphere apart from the norm. Skunkworks falls flat and comes off as a desperate attempt to fit into the alternative sound. There are some songs that are exceptional, like Meltdown and Inertia. But everything else is just abysmal, with songs like Space Race and Dream State, which is a fitting song because this album will put you in a dream state, no joke. Skunkworks is ponce and tiresome, and it was no surprise that this band would split, and Bruce Dickinson would team back up with Roy Z and Company for the follow-up.
No, Skunkworks is no more.
What's that?
We got so far apart on what kind of music we all wanted to make. I mean, I wanted to make at least a rock album, you know. And the other guys in the band were, you know, at least Al, the guitarist, was like, he wanted to make a very alternative type of thing. And I was like, look, you know, this is not going to work. You know, you should go and do your thing and form your own band and do that. You know, which he's done, which is great. And then I phoned up Roy Z, who did the To Picasso record with me, and I said, how do you feel about writing a real balls-out metal record?
Is he playing on the album?
Oh yeah.
So you're on your guitar team?
Yeah.
After Bruce's last outing failed to bear any fruit, he decided to go back to his roots, and he even brought in former Maiden bandmate Adrian Smith to complete the dual guitarist component with Roy Z. The result would be Accident of Birth, the heaviest album Bruce had made since leaving the Maiden Fortress, and it rips. The guitars were tuned down to drop D at the advice of Roy Z, who also produced the album, giving it a thicker, grimier sound, and it melds with Adrian Smith's Maiden-esque guitar playing. Each track hits hard, with the exception of Totec 7 Arrival, which is just a strange little interlude at the beginning of the album. But it does nothing to slow this album's pace, as it forges ahead with each fiery fist-pounding track. And to top it all off, this is Bruce's return to his famous air raid vocals, which are stronger than ever. The top track on Accident of Birth, I'd say Dark Side of Aquarius.
Here come the riders as the wheel of Thomas running out of time. Here come the riders as the revolution stepping into life. The dark side of Aquarius has robbed us of our souls and minds. Here come the riders as the wheel of Thomas running out.
But there are some close runner-ups, like Star Children and Road to Hell, and even the second to last track, Omega.
Now it's Omega Zero Day. The red star shines its last rays. The sun that gave us life yesterday is now
The lyrics and themes are more fantasy-based other than dealing with real life or political themes, which is one of the things I like. With Accident of Birth, Bruce Dickinson did what very few solo vocalists have, which is overshadow their previous band. But with how stellar this album is, you cannot help but feel it's just a stepping stone for the album that would come next.
Because Accident of Birth was, I think, was such a great record. I was real nervous about doing this one. I was like, God, we got such great reviews.
Yeah.
You know, and I was just like, oh man, you know, we're going to do another record. If it's not as good, or if it's just even the same as, that won't cut it.
Yeah.
You know, but I think we've beaten it. We really have. I mean, big time.
You know what? It's really great is that I, you know, most people would think, oh, this, you know, he's leaving Iron Maiden, he's had it. You know, I mean, let's face it, that's the way the industry is. You know.
Think again, bozo.
Yeah, well, the thing is,
Spitting out the sun, the beginning of creation of the common one.
After greasing up their creative gears, Bruce and the boys would put out the most powerful album yet, The Chemical Wedding. The Chemical Wedding is nothing short of a magnum opus. The album itself borrows heavily from 18th century poet and painter William Blake, whose work is centered on Christian mysticism and other esoteric subjects. The album is also centered on the obscure subject of alchemy. From front to back, The Chemical Wedding shreds, with the down-tuned guitars cutting through like buzzsaws and only stopping for the occasional breath of air. And Bruce Dickinson gives a biblical performance, which is carried by Roy Z and Adrian Smith's masterful guitar playing. Each track is pure gold, and even the bonus tracks shimmer. 3 of the tracks are expressly derived from the poetry of William Blake, as I mentioned earlier, those being the thunderous Book of Thel, the Gates of Urizen being the grand architect and creator in Blake's mythology, and Jerusalem, which Blake was given a writing credit for. Blake's version of Jerusalem is even an unofficial national anthem for the UK. A lot of the songs focus on the tragedy of failure, such as Chemical Wedding and The Alchemist. The alchemists failed to achieve their life's goal of alchemy and finding the elixir for eternal life. Thus they all lay in the same grave of failure. Also there's the Trumpets of Jericho, which tells of an alternative reality in which the trumpets failed to bring down the walls of Jericho, putting an end to people's faith and turning the earth into hell.
At the trumpets of Jericho, still the walls remain. Oh, the trumpets of Jericho, still the walls remain. At the end of the rainbow, there the choir remains. Sound the trumpets of Jericho, hear the loud and chain.
On the other side of the coin is fear. Fear of the wicked that is destined to come, which is presented in songs like King Crimson and Killing Floor. The metallic heaviness of the Chemical Wedding is followed by a thick, dark atmosphere. And seriously, after listening to this album, I want to know why Roy Z hasn't produced any of Maiden's recent albums. Maybe trim the long, redundant 10-minute songs and add in some substance. But hey, that's just a suggestion. Years later, Bruce Dickinson would write a movie called Chemical Wedding about a reincarnated Aleister Crowley, but the only similarities lie with the name, since the movie has fuck all to do with this album. The Chemical Wedding takes you on a journey with many bends and curves and plunges you into the dark realm of mysticism, leaving nothing to be desired. It is worth every penny.
What do you want from me? I sense your mastery. There's something you won't ever find. So have your way with me. This soldier's lost his victory. Rip me up, leave me behind.
Tyranny of Souls was Bruce Dickinson's first solo album after the reunion with Iron Maiden and his last solo album to date. The whole album was written exclusively by Bruce and Roy Z, seeing it as Adrian Smith chose to remain in the Iron Maiden camp. And while I wouldn't call it a follow-up to the Chemical Wedding, it's still a strong album. But rather than gallop, Tyranny of Souls kind of limps to the finish line like a sickly horse. But the highs are more prevalent than the lows, as the dark and gloomy tones blow out with songs like Kill Devil Hill, River of No Return, Believer, and the title track, A Tyranny of Souls.
A tyranny of souls that love has lost. A tyranny of souls, a Pentecost. Speaking tongues of fire, inflaming our desires. Watching as we die.
As far as the bad, holy fuck, navigate the seas of the sun. You can navigate this anticlimactic track into the sun. Everything else is solid, even though some songs are a little better than others, and touching on topics from alien abduction to the White Brothers' first flight, and there was even some Shakespearean influence on A Tyranny of Souls. Bruce would settle back up with Maiden permanently after Tyranny of Souls, but has mentioned he wanted to make another solo album in the near future. But since Bruce Dickinson is a modern day Renaissance man, I'm sure we'll have to wait a little longer. But anyways, that will do it for this retro doc. I will see you next time.